I have to start by saying that the lecture of tonight's topic is a rather dangerous one, for a very simple reason. Because that forms a great part, a major part of my PhD thesis. In fact, in the first volume, that is about 100 pages. Please don't worry, I will talk as briefly as possible. But before I introduce my talk, I hope you will allow me to tell you a story. And the story is strictly part what I intend to say tonight. And it concerns a very dear friend who died long time ago. When I wrote my thesis, I wrote about this Mihrab Sulayman. I wrote about the etymological and architectural origin of the Mihrab, without seeing many of the Mihrabs which later on were included in my thesis. And I certainly haven't seen the Mihrab, which is the main topic of my talk tonight. But then my school, the School of Oriental and African Studies, in 1963 and 64 sent both of us on a study leave, a one-year study leave, to the Middle East. I was in correspondence with a lot of colleagues in the area, and among them was a very dear, who became later on a great friend, Awni Dajani, who was then the director of the Department of Antiquities in Jordan. I never met Awni, but we were in correspondence. We arrived in Jordan on the 1st of February 1964. It was a hailstorm. And as we crossed the frontier, there was a policeman, stopped as Irene was driving, and asked us a question. Do you know what is the difference between a British policeman and the Jordanian one? I said, I don't know. He said, well, if you ask anything from a British policeman, where is such and such a place, he will very politely explain it to you. But when you ask a Jordanian policeman, he will take you there. Well, the hailstorm continued. We arrived in Amman, and there was a motorcyclist policeman, and I asked him, where is the Department of Antiquities? He said, follow me. So we followed him, and that was the first time we met Awni. I said to Awni, we have to find a hotel. He said, no, you are not going to any hotel. You are coming to my farm in Jericho. You are going to stay on my farm. So we stayed for a month on his farm, which was very well located for a very simple reason. Because one day we went up to Jerusalem, the other day I went to see the Umayyad palaces in the desert. So I was very close to Mihrab Sulayman and the Dome of the Rock. And the photograph, I tried several photographs, I have to confess I miserably failed. The photograph you will see, which is excellent, was done by the photographer of the Department of Antiquities, whom I remember only as Abu Zuzu. Abu Zuzu provided the only good workable photograph slide, and the details which you will see were provided by a former student of mine, who later on was the director of the Institute for Hajj Research in Jeddah. With his beautiful equipment, computer equipment, from this only slide, he took details, and you will see how the details are good. Now, after this introduction, but before I really start my talk, I have to say something about Awni. I owe a great deal to Awni. Unfortunately, Awni died soon after the West Bank was lost. When he lost his farm, he had a cancer, a throat cancer. He died in October 1967, and his wife Sally died 2 years later. Well, I would like to dedicate this lecture to his memory. Well, now let's turn to the subject. Can I have the first slides? I intend to divide my lecture into three parts. In the first part, I will talk about the etymological origin of the word, but because for most of you that would be a boring subject, Mr. Rajab suggested to me, instead of reading it, I should project it, so that you can see what I'm talking about, both in Arabic and in English. In the second part, again it will be short, I talk about the possible architectural origin, and then I will turn in the third part to my main subject, where the word mihrab, or in plural maharib, means a lot of things. First of all, a palace, the upper end of a sitting room or a house, or tent or a chamber, a high place, the highest chamber in a house, private chamber of a king or a prince, into which he retires alone, out of the way of the people. And finally, as we know it today, a place where the imam stands or sits in a mosque. Now, it originates from the radicals HRB, HRB, which is connected to the verb hariba yahrabu, which means in the first form to be vehemently angry, to be affected by canine madness, in the second form to provoke, to sharpen, to excite anyone, in the third to fight, content in war with, and in the fifth form to wage war. Now, because of this meaning, a lot of scholars suggested that the word mihrab cannot derive from this verb, and this has no connection to these radicals HRB, but it must be a loan word in Arabic, either from the Ethiopian mekurab, which means a church, or the Hebrew haravot, which means ruined places. Later on, there were many articles dealing with the mihrab, all rejected this idea that it is a loan word in Arabic. First of all, because the radical, both in the Ethiopian and the Hebrew, is different. It is not HRB, so it is not a loan word in Arabic. Then Lane, in his big Arabic-English dictionary, said, the only connection and the possible explanation is that the worshipper who is praying, actually he is at war with himself and with the devil, and he tries to concentrate his thoughts, his ideas, to his prayer. Goldziher repeated it, the great Islamist, but he said, if we really wish to know what is the meaning of the word mihrab, we have to turn first of all to the Holy Quran. Now, in the Holy Quran, I am afraid I went too far. I would like to go back here one. Can I go on that to the next one? And that's it. So we have to study the Holy Quran, where it appears in 5 different places. First of all, in the Surah Al-Maryam, verse 11, where he said, "Wa haraja ala qawmihi min al-mihrab." So Zachariah came out of his people from the mihrab. Here it can be explained as a kind of a sanctuary or a church or part of a church. It is explained. In Surah Al-Imran, both verses 37 and 39, it may have exactly the same meaning. وَكُلَّمَا دَخَلَ عَلَيْهَا زَكَرِيَّا الْمِحْرَابَ وَجَدَ عِنْدَهَا رِزْقًا. Whenever Zachariah entered the mihrab to see her, he found her supplied with sustenance. In verse 39, فَنَادَتْهِ مَلَائِكَتُهُ وَهُوَ يُصَلَّى فِي الْمِحْرَابِ. While he was standing in the mihrab, the angels called unto him. So it has, I think, still the same meaning, and also here in the Surah Sabah, Surah 34, verse 14, when it says, يَعْلِمُونَ لَهُ مَا يَشَاءُ مِنْ الْمَحَارِبِ. I made for him, that is for Solomon, what he desired, mihrabs. But in Surah Sad, verse 21, it has a different meaning, as it was explained by several colors. وَهَلْ أَتَاكَ نَبَأُ إِذْ الْحِصْمُ تُصَوَّرُ الْمِحْرَابِ. Behold, I climbed over the wall to the mihrab. It is explained here by several scholars that here it is not a sanctuary, not part of a church, but probably a palace. Now, I think it is also advisable to examine to examine, I don't need the other one, but never mind, you can leave it there, the pre-Islamic poetry. Particularly, I would like to talk about two. One of them is by Imrul Qais, where it says, Kagazlan Raml fi Mihrab Akyal, like the gazelles of the desert in the palaces of the kings. So it is quite clear that he talks about, the poet talks about a palace. Now in the second one is by al-Athar, and there was a study on this by several scholars, among them by Horowitz, a famous Arabist, where it says, وَحَتَّتْ بِأَسْبَابٍ لَهَا مُسْتَمِرَّةٍ أُذَيْنَ فِي مِحْرَابِ تَدْمُرْ ثَابِيًا. And she retained Udayna with her strong strings in the Mihrab of Tadmur. Now Horowitz explained it, that it is probably a private chamber, a prince or princess's private chamber. That's where Udayna was retained. But when you read the entire poem, I wrote an article. By the way, I have to mention, there are many other studies on the etymological origin of the Mihrab. I had to reduce it. I had to reduce it because there are so many articles. I just picked out the most important references. Now, when you read the entire poem by al-Athar, you will find that here the she, wahattat, she refers to al-Maniyya, fate or death. It was death which retained Udayna, Odenatus, the uncrowned king of Palmyra, Tadmur, in the mihrabs of Palmyra. So it was death. And accordingly, and I am not the only one who said so, I had a colleague, Dr. Mahmoud Gul, in our school, who explained exactly the same way the meaning of the word mihrab in this poem as a kind of a burial place. The lead professor, Bob Sargent, who was also a great Arabist, he wrote an article and explained it, that here in this pre-Islamic poetry, the word mihrab actually means a space between columns or pilasters. Well, I will come back to that, but I just changed my side. Please leave it on. Now, mihrab as such exists in a secular architecture, and the best example is, could you focus it a little bit? You see, it appears in secular architecture, and the best example is here in Hirbat al-Mabjar, just outside Jericho, a beautiful and the most impressive and important of the Umayyad palaces. Hirbat al-Mabjar is in two parts. First of all, here is the complex, the palace complex. There is a beautiful forecourt with a pavilion here with a little pool, and then there is the great, first of all, when it was excavated in British times by Robert Hamilton, he explained it that was a hammam. Later on it was realized it was much bigger than a hammam, particularly because the hammam is there behind. So that was a kind of majlis, a divaniya. Now there is a beautiful entrance here. Here. There was even the caliph's statue on the top of the dome in a recess. And as you enter, just opposite the entrance was the mihrab. This one, that is the place, that is a section, that's how it looked. And there is the stone kalansuva, which replaced, of course, the crown, and the caliph was sitting underneath. Now, can I have the next one? That is the divan. That's how it looked when they excavated it. It has a beautiful floor, mosaic floor. The entire place is covered by beautiful mosaics, but the most important one is here, you see, showing a knife and a fruit. Now, according to Hamilton, when they excavated it, the workers started to shout, the caliph and his wife, positive and negative. So that was the caliph's place where he used to sit. opposite the entrance, the first place in a majlis. But that was also the case in the second Umayyad palace, which I wish to show you here, Mashatta, which is now just outside the international airport of Jordan. You see, Mashatta is in two parts. In fact, it's supposed to be three, but the third one was never built. Here is the actual palace complex, that is the gateway complex, and here is the caliph's place, just opposite the entrance. What you see there, that was a mihrab, or that is explained as a mihrab, the first place in a majlis, in a palace, in secular architecture. Now the third one I will show you is Qusayr Amra. It's a well-known building, a beautiful, it wasn't a palace, it was a small bath, also in the Jordanian desert. You see, it is in two parts. Here is the entrance hall, the majlis, and that was the place of the owner, who was probably Yazid ibn Walid, the owner of this little building. And his picture, in fact, appears on the back wall of this little secular mihrab. There he is. Now, so that is the mihrab in secular architecture. But when we look at and think about differently in the religious sense, scholars explained that the mihrab in a mosque may have three possible origins. One of them is the Buddhist niche, where the Buddha statue is standing or sitting. As you can see here, that is a beautiful place. It is Bamiyan. As you enter the Bamiyan valley and look at that green valley, opposite as you enter, coming down from the pass, you will see these two huge statues. That is the large statue, that is the small one. One of them is 53, the other 35 meters. So they explained that probably that was it. It had an origin, a Buddhist niche. The second possible origin, so they said, was here in a Jewish synagogue, where the direction of Jerusalem is shown by an apse. Now, that is the synagogue of Beth Alpha, just south of Lake Tiberias. That was excavated by British archaeologists in 1926 and 28. And I explained that is the earliest synagogue which keeps a Jerusalem direction. But then what happened, in the early 30s, French colleagues discovered another one in Jura Europos. There is the aerial photograph of Jura Europos. There is the Euphrates. That is a huge, very impressive site. And here there was a synagogue. What you can see here is the so-called Aron HaKodesh with a recess showing what could be a mihrab. That is now preserved in the National Museum in Damascus. Now, I believe that here there is a problem, because when you look at and check early Arabic historians, you find that they say that at that time there was no mihrab recess at the beginning. On the contrary, they also add that it was forbidden to use the niche because it reminded them of a church. So at the beginning there was no mihrab niche. They explained that in the Prophet's time, or in the first Caliph's time, there was only a strip of paint or a stone embedded in the Qibla wall. So what kind of stone was embedded in the Qibla wall? If we go further, sorry, I forgot about that. Is the third possibility, the Coptic apse. That comes from Saqqara, outside Cairo, an excavated Coptic church, which is now in the Coptic Museum in Cairo, and there is the pulpit. So they explained that probably this recess and the pulpit, that's what the Muslims inherited. But as I said, there is a problem. There was no mihrab niche. But when we remember Al-Ashan's poem, that Uzayna was retained by Mania, by death, in the mihrab of Tadmur, of Palmyra. What are the Maharib? What are the Mihrabs of Palmyra? Well, these tomb towers. It was here, in these tomb towers, where Udayna was lowered by death, by Mania, where he lays buried. So therefore, if we look at it differently and say that the Mihrab, at the time of the pre-Islamic poets, and probably even in the Prophet's time, and in the early Islamic period, meant a burial place, then we have to think about a stone which was somewhat decorated. Now here we have, sorry, can we go back? Here we have very early Coptic tombstones. These are 5th or 6th century in the Coptic Museum in Cairo, but there are similar ones also in Alexandria. You will see 2 pilasters, and between the pilasters there is a space. As Professor Sargent explained, the space between is a mihrab, and these 2 are connected by an arch. In 1972, I published an article entitled Mihrab or Tombstone, because there was a stone in the Metropolitan Museum, that is in the centennial volume of the Metropolitan Museum, and I didn't know whether it was a tombstone or whether it was a mihrab. Now when you examine the tombstones of different Muslim countries, you will find that there is always a connection in style, in decoration, between the mihrab of that particular country and the tombstone of that country. When you go to Turkey, you see the connection. When you go to the Maghreb, there is a connection. When you go to Egypt, you see the connection. So there is a possibility that originally, when it was just a stone, it was a kind of a tombstone imitating it. But I would go on and produce more evidence for it. First of all, we have evidence from Umayyad architecture that at the beginning there was no this. There is one to the right here, an excavated very early mosque in Bampur, what is now in Pakistan, 40 kilometers outside Karachi. Here the excavators discovered 2 Kufic tombstones and stones with Kufic inscriptions, both dating from Umayyad times. But what they never discovered, there was no mihrab recess. And the conclusion was, of course there was no mihrab recess, because there was a flat mihrab, a panel, probably which looked like a tombstone. The other possible place is here, which is in Wasit. That was excavated by Fuad Safar in the 30s. Now from historical sources we know that Wasit had 4 mosques built above the other, except the earliest one was built by Hajjaj, who was the governor in early Umayyad times of Iraq. And next to his mosque, he built his palace. Now when they excavated the first mihrab, the first mosque, and the second and the third, here it is, they found mihrab recess. They were later, but there was no trace of the palace. They went further down, and what they discovered was this one. That was the earliest mosque, and it had no mihrab recess, but they found a tombstone, or rather what looked like a tombstone, a flat mihrab. And of course there was a problem here. It had a different orientation from the other 3. Now here I would like to say something, because when the Umayyads were overthrown by the Abbasids, Abbasid historians and even Byzantine historians claimed and accused Abdul Malik and the Umayyads, that, but particularly Abdul Malik, that he wanted to create and distract the pilgrims from Mecca to Jerusalem. He wanted to change back the Qibla to Jerusalem. But I come back to that because that can be easily refuted. But I have more evidence, And here it is, that is in southeastern Turkey, that is Harran. Harran, the Mosque of Harran presents two periods. It was excavated by my former supervisor, David Storm Rice. The minaret, what you see there, is Umayyad. The standing walls are much later, dating back to the 12th and 13th centuries, probably Abbasi or Ayyubid or even early Mamluk. But when Rice excavated it, and here is his ground plan, he discovered that the original Qibla was here, and that was the original mosque. It was enlarged at later time. And here in the center, he discovered a flat mihrab. Here was the later mihrab, which was a recess, but that is 12th or 13th centuries. Unfortunately, Rice very soon after these excavations died, and when I went to Harran twice, I was looking for that mihrab in Harran, in Adana, in Urfa, and in Ankara, in the Archaeological Museum. I was unable to find it. Somewhere it must be misplaced. But there is a flat mihrab which comes from Harran, and it is definitely Umayyad. Now, then we come to Jerusalem. What was the importance of Jerusalem for Abdul Malik, who built the Dome of the Rock in 691 or 71 of the Hijrah? As I said, Abbasid historians and Byzantine historians accused him. He wanted to divert the Muslims from Mecca because he had a rival caliph, Ibn Zubayr, in Mecca. But there is a problem here again, fortunately, because Ibn Zubayr, soon after the Qubbat al-Sakhra was completed, was defeated and killed. I don't believe for a moment that that was Abdul Malik's intention to divert the Muslims. He had different intention. And the different intention was explained by the building itself. It is not a mosque. It is quite different. It had a different purpose, but it became clear only after recent excavations what were taking place under the Haram area. But before I do that, I would like to say a few words about the Dome of the Rock. Now, the recent excavations, and that was carried out by a former student of mine, who is an Arab, but working with the Department of Antiquities of the Israelis, they discovered 3 Umayyad palaces, all dating back here. That is the Haram area, and there is the Dome of the Rock, that is the Aqsa Mosque. And all 3 palaces date back, according to the archaeological evidence, to the period of Abdul Malik. So Abdul Malik wanted to create a major center, but certainly not a religious center. A major, maybe an administrative center. Perhaps he intended to transfer his capital from Damascus to Jerusalem. We don't know. But certainly he had no intention to create a new center of orientation. And I can prove that. Now, here is a model of the Dome of the Rock that was prepared in 1982. There was an exhibition organized by the British Arab Chamber of Commerce. It was a beautiful model, and they let me photograph it, and it shows you the construction and the section. Now, inside there are mosaics, beautiful gold mosaics decorating the central octagon, and also the drum of the dome, and also the internal walls. And that's where the inscription is, which gave the name of Abdul Malik and the date of 71 or 692. But his name was substituted by the Abbasid Caliph al-Ma'mun later, but fortunately he left the date, so he tried to cheat. Now, here are 2 beautiful mosaics, that is on the drum and that is on the octagon. So these are beautiful mosaics, and above there is the inscription, also in gold mosaic. But what is our interest is really the cave under the rock. And here it is. You go down here to this cave, You enter the mosque, there are 4 entrances. You enter the mosque or the building and you go down into this cave. And to the right and to the left of this cave there are 2 mihrabs. And these were first photographed and published in 1867. These photographs are from a very early book, 1867. That one is Mihrab Dawood, that is Mihrab Sulayman, which is the subject of my talk tonight. Now we know the story of Mihrab Dawood. Mihrab Dawood, there it is, Mihrab Dawood, was put in to the Qubbatus Sakhra upstairs by the Crusaders when they occupied Jerusalem. When the Muslims liberated Jerusalem, they removed this, it was used as an altar. They removed this and it became Mihrab Dawood. And it is just opposite on the other side of the staircase, but keeping the Qibla direction. And here is Mihrab Sulayman or Solomon's Mihrab. Now, here I go to the color photographs, the photographs of Abu Zuzu. When this Mihrab was mentioned by Creswell, by many others, they said it must be contemporary with the building for the following reasons. They argued, first of all, that the elliptical arch is typical of the pre-Islamic and the early Islamic period. Secondly, this floral decoration which runs about the lintel and on the archivolt is also typical of the Byzantine and early Islamic period. Then, on the lintel here, you will see a very simple Kufic inscription, the Shahada, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. That is an early Kufic inscription. Therefore, it should be contemporary with the building. Furthermore, the spiral pilasters again are typical, and you recall the Coptic tombstones. They are typical of the period, but they appear on glass, they appear even on metalwork. And here, there is a decorative band on either side of this spiral pilaster, which they say is a misunderstood Greek astragal, an elongated lozenge alternating with a rosette. Well, I published an article, my Mihrab and Tombstone, where I claim that is the earliest known Mihrab, and also another one in the Encyclopedia of Islam, but when you read it, please beware that they missed up the captions and they gave the date as 962. Now, but there is something else. Here is a milestone which Creswell and others published, that the inscription and the decoration there is similar to that which goes around the frame and the archivolt of Mihrab Sulayman. But there was another very important discovery, namely this one. This little coin, which is a very early coin, the first attempt to produce an Islamic coinage. It dates back to the year of Abdul Malik's reform, which is 75 or 695. The coin is now in the Numismatic Society's Museum in New York. It was George Maas who published this article and this coin, and he said that it is a mihrab is beyond any doubt. He entitled his article as Mihrab and Anaza because this pair is the Anaza. And there it says the inscription Halifatullahi Amir al-Mu'minin, and on the reverse is the portrait of Abdul Malik, and it says so. But what is important, Miles said that this mihrab must have been modeled on an existing mihrab. Now we know that at that time no semicircular mihrabs existed. The first one was built in Damascus in 705 and later in the Prophet's Mosque in Medina, but much later. So the only plausible model could have been Mihrab Sulayman. So that's how it was. Several of us accepted Mihrab Sulayman as original and the same period as the Dome of the Rock. But then a colleague of mine, Dr. Eva Baer, published an article in Muqarnas Volume 3, 1983, and said that the arch is so unusual of that early period that it cannot be of the 7th century, it must be much later. And as an evidence, he referred to this mihrab, the Jami al-Umariyah in Mosul. But she published only the central part, not the rest, not the entire mihrab. We went there with Irene and we saw this mihrab, and indeed, I can tell you, the upper part is certainly 9th century or even later. But this first part, the lower part, the central part is earlier. And it's very unlikely that the Mihrab Sulayman copied the Jami al-Umariyah. It was rather the other way round. But then a colleague of mine, another colleague of mine, produced another evidence that from Ajmer, the Arhai Dinka Jompra, which was built in 595 or 1199 by pilgrims returning from Mecca and Medina from Jerusalem. Look at the arch, and also look at, there is something which is a black stone. I'm going to talk about the black stone. So that is a copy, both are copies of Mihrab Sulayman. Now, Eva Baer also suggested that the arch is not elliptical, but it is pointed. And in that respect, she is right. And she said that such a pointed arch is much later. It comes into Islamic architecture in the 2nd or 3rd century of the Hijrah. Well, I think I can refute it, because here is a stupa outside Kabul, 40 kilometers outside Kabul. It is called the Stupa of Guldara, and if you look at these arches, you see, these are pointed, what we call oji-shaped arches, exactly the same type as on Mihrab Sulayman. But I go even further. The 3-lobed arches, and the stupa dates from the 2nd or 3rd century AD. These are arches from caves in Bamiyan, dating back to the same period, 2nd or 3rd century. And you can see that the archivolt is decorated with a beautiful floral design, not exactly the same type, but certainly the idea is the same. So that is what later on the builders, the decorators of the Dome of the Rock accepted. They had the idea because, after all, they inherited a great deal from Central Asia. Now, Eva Baer's second objection was, unfortunately, this photograph is not very good. I have better produce a better photograph when we go to Central Asia. You see, in the spandrels, there is a sun motif and 2 patterns which may look like arrows. Now again, Eva Baer suggested that doesn't appear before the 9th century. I'm sorry it does, because here, I don't know whether you can see it, exactly the same arrow appears here in the spandrels of a very early mihrab in Afrasiab, which is 8th century. So it is already there in the 2nd century of the Hijrah. Her third objection was that the inscription, unfortunately, here you can't see it properly. Well, that is a copy of a copy. The inscription, she said, cannot be the 1st century of the Hijrah because there is this hook in the word Allah. Now, when you look at early Qurans, and there are several early Qurans surviving, indeed, the word Allah is written with a straight line. But one shouldn't forget that here the artist was not working on paper, but on a different media, on stone. And therefore, he may have been forced by the strength of the stone to produce such a little hook. And that is not enough evidence, because the 3rd century Kufic looks quite different from this one. So I believe that that is not a strong objection for an early date. Furthermore, what everybody forgot, and let me talk about it, on the top there are 2 decorative panels. One of them is row of pearls, which is typical of Sasanian art, and then it continued in early Islamic art and architecture during the 2nd and the 3rd centuries. Furthermore, on top there are crenellations, and these crenellations appear in Umayyad architecture, but not later. So that would be 2 important evidence for an early date. There are 2 other things I would like to add. Along the edge, that is a small marble panel, I forgot to mention it, measuring 137 by 70 centimeters. So it's a small marble panel. But along here, there was a Kufic inscription. Unfortunately, it is broken. You can't see it. Now, when I visited Jerusalem in '64, at the time of Auni Dajjani, the Dome of the Rock was under restoration. And I was talking to the Egyptian architect who was in charge, and he told me that at the back of the Mihrab there is a Kufic inscription, a very early Kufic inscription. So I asked him, have you recorded it? He said, no, we forgot it. So they fixed it back and never recorded it. Now Eva Baer claims that she was talking to the same architect, who denies that he has ever seen an inscription. So I don't know whether there is an inscription or not. Future generations should remember, when they restore it again, they should check it. But there is something else that everybody forgot. That is a black stone. And this black stone is a meteorite stone. And it has been recorded. And my student from Jerusalem said to me that there is evidence for it, that this black stone was removed by Abdul Malik from the Holy Sepulchre to the Dome of the Rock. I think the evidence for an early date that Mihrab Sulayman is contemporary with the Dome of the Rock is substantial, and we could accept its original date. Thank you very much.